This has been almost from the beginning a contest in competitive collapse. Now, competitive collapse, that terminology was coined by Elliot Cohen in connection with the First World War. And, I think it's a good way to look at what's happening right now. When we say competitive collapse, what are we talking about? And you just outlined it. Iran is not going to collapse. Iran is going to stay the course to the bitter end because this is an existential question for Iran. So is there any possibility of a negotiated settlement that deviates from those points? Yes, but only on the U.S. side. And here again, Trump has put himself in a very difficult position because he has made promises to his political supporters in Israel and inside the United States, and this broad thing that we refer to as the Jewish lobby. And he has said to the American people, that he, after all, is inevitably the winner, the victor, and so forth. We've gone from unconditional surrender now to these 4 points. So how do we get out of this? Well, we get out of it because we can't stay there much longer. Now, right now, at the moment, he's got Secretary Besson saying, don't worry, we can print as much money as we need to, and we can stay there as long as possible. Well, we'll see. I think the bond market in particular will collapse before he can print the additional billions that will be needed to sustain our presence over there. I also think that the public pressure around the world is going to be enormous. As I said before, when you talk to the global south, when you talk to Beijing, when you talk to Moscow, and you talk to people in the Middle East, whether it's Ankara or Cairo or anywhere else, everyone takes the same position. Iran must stay the course. They back Iran. Now, they may not back it all militarily, but they are on Iran's side. And so we are the ones who are held responsible for the stoppage, the blockage. Remember, until we attacked, the Gulf was open. Everybody needs to remember that. We caused it to be closed. No one in the global south and no one in China or Russia for a second is angry with Iran for what Iran has done. Iran, if anything, bent over backwards to get along with us. Go all the way back to the 12-day war that ended with the B-2 strikes. Remember when that was over and President Trump announced that there was no more nuclear program. It had been destroyed forever. The war was over. I think that's really what he wanted. But he couldn't make it happen. He couldn't make it stick. He couldn't make it stick because of Netanyahu and Netanyahu's backers, who are billionaires in the United States. So that's the sticking problem. What happens, though, if the bond market collapses? What happens if we are in a real serious financial crisis, which is where I think we are headed right now? My answer is the hard decision will have to be made on our side. What are we going to punt on? How far do we punt? Do we go back and say, well, we wanted these 4 things, but we'll go ahead, we'll release this money and we'll do something else, but we won't release it all at once. And oh, by the way, it's negotiable how we end up participating or not participating in the Persian Gulf and access and so forth. When you begin to hear those rumblings, that's because we are in trouble here at home financially and economically. So I had the good fortune to meet a number of very senior Israeli military leaders. They're all very competent, very thoughtful, sober-minded people. You have wiggle room with Iran. You can come to some sort of a modus vivendi there. The situation in Syria is dangerous, but at the moment manageable. The Greater Israel Project is something that, quite frankly, is just not going to happen. And I think that's increasingly understood inside the senior ranks. But there is one area where the senior Israeli military is going to make it clear where they cannot compromise. It's difficult to compromise on the question of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is an existential threat to the Israeli state. No one can move back to northern Israel until Hezbollah is either destroyed or there is a way found to end the conflict with them. Right now, there doesn't appear to be any chance whatsoever for a negotiated end to that fight. Iran has now done something which no one else in the region has done. It is said that their fight is Gaza's fight. Gaza's fight is Iran's fight. Hezbollah's fight is Iran's fight, and Iran's fight is Hezbollah's fight. In other words, Iran has emerged as the leader of the Islamic world in resistance to Israeli Jewish supremacy in the region. Not so much us, because quite frankly, our bases are destroyed. Our bases, we're ejected already for all intents and purposes from the Persian Gulf region. Very few people, and I think this is an honest appraisal, either in Washington privately or overseas, expect us to pour back into the Persian Gulf when the war ends. I just don't see that occurring. Hezbollah is another matter. I don't know how you deal with that as an Israeli, other than scorched earth, because both sides are incurably hostile to the other. There doesn't appear to be any room there. So whatever President Trump asks the Israelis to do, the one thing I do not think they will ever do is cease and desist from their attacks on Hezbollah. And they will hold on to the area south of the Litani River. They may try to repopulate it at some point with Jews that they can bring in from the United States or elsewhere in Europe, perhaps, but they cannot allow Hezbollah to organize itself and establish that area as a new platform for attack against Israel. That's just not possible. So I think.
I'm sorry, Doug, let me ask you, militarily, though, is that an attainable objective? Because they've been trying for a long time. And from what I've read, militarily, both tactically on the ground in southern Lebanon and even in the air, they are stretched thin and they're having a hard time even maintaining stability in there. Can Israel attain that militarily?
Well, unfortunately, and I think you're right, and I think some senior Israeli officers have made these points, but it has not mattered, because there is no willingness to come to any sort of arrangement that leaves that area south of the Litani in somebody's hands other than Israel's. And I think that's a huge issue for the Israelis. I mean, it's sort of, if you could find a way to Finlandize Lebanon, and I mean Finlandize it in the most serious sense of the word, that might work. And I certainly would encourage the Israelis to at least explore it. But I don't think you can do that. I mean, my gut tells me that may not be possible. So I think that President Trump can get a lot of what he wants. But I think when it comes to Hezbollah and southern Lebanon, it's just not possible to negotiate that. Now, there may be ways, if we decided to find a solution there, if we could pull out of everything else, in other words, distance ourselves from all the other things the Israelis are about and apply ourselves to that first and foremost, we might get somewhere. I don't know. I mean, that's beyond my, Aaron David Miller is somebody that you should ask to come on and talk about that. He has much more experience in that area than I do. And a lot of his information is very current. It's an insoluble problem. And it's unfortunate that we started this war in the Persian Gulf, because had we not done so, we wouldn't have seen some nuclear detonation anytime soon. That's a lot of nonsense. I think everybody knows that. Anybody with a brain does. But perhaps we could have put our heads together and come up with a better solution in Lebanon. That water's under the bridge now. So we're stuck. And I think the only thing that's going to get Mr. Netanyahu's attention is the wholesale withdrawal of all military support of all kinds from Israel, period. If that's threatened and then it is implemented, yes, he will have the attention of not just Mr. Netanyahu, but the entire Israeli state. And that may be the only way out for him. But again, how long does he expect to last in office if he does that? He may not expect to last very long. Remember, they have tremendous influence and power here inside our country. This is the unspoken truth. And increasingly, I'm listening to people who are accused of being anti-Semites, and in reality, they're not anti-Semitic. They're simply resisting Jewish power and influence inside the United States. That's very different. There is no nation state in the world today with whom we have more closely cooperated in military and diplomatic terms over the last century than Great Britain. In the 1990s, when I was in the War Plans Division, we looked at the capabilities of our various allied elements. Pete, this is back in, this was 94, 95. And one of the observations was that, the British really ought to be more robustly equipped and armed for future operations than they are. At that particular point in time, I think on a good day, the British Army could field 40,000 troops to deploy and fight. Today, I'd say it's 30,000 or less. But in those days, that was about it. That was not nearly what we hoped for, what we liked. And there was a discussion regarding whether or not we should go to the Hill and recommend some sort of aid program, military aid program, similar to what we'd done for Israel, by the way, for Britain, for the British military, to bring it up to a level where it was far more capable than it was at the time. And that was crushed almost immediately. Absolutely unacceptable. And the reason was not that we disliked the British, but we weren't going to admit them to the inner sanctum of the U.S. Armed Forces. It was just too much at risk, and we weren't going to do it. And we weren't going to become part of their so-called military-industrial parliamentary complex. So Israel has always been there. Israel has always had its fingers in these things. And via Congress, Congress has consistently over the last 25 to 30 years pushed harder and harder to give the Israelis greater and greater access to technology, to information, to classified documents, and so forth. And they've done that because it benefited them financially to do so. And then we appointed people to high office inside the Department of Defense who had very close ties to the Israelis, dangerously close. And I think this got off the ground initially towards the end of the Bush administration, and then that remained a constant issue ever thereafter. And the second Bush administration certainly fell into that category, where we effectively opened our kimono. This is something that has to be reversed from the top. We need new laws. We need much stiffer laws for security matters. And then we have, quite frankly, too much, too often is leaked to too many people, period. And now with this new effort, everything's at risk. J.D. Vance is where he is because, like everyone else in the Trump administration, they had to take the oath of allegiance to Israel First agenda, the Israel First policies, the Israel First mentality, the Israel First commitment. I think he sees the polls. He sees the wind is changing. Most political figures are windsocks. And I think he sees that the wind is blowing very strongly now in a direction that is antithetical to the interests of Israel First. And so now he is trying to put distance between himself and the president without seeming to do so. So I would like to give you some optimism, but I can't.
A couple of things I want to point out here. Number one is a lot of our bases, according to Washington Post recently, 20 bases have been either damaged or seriously harmed. I don't think any of them have been outright destroyed. But so the question is going to be, once this is ended by whatever means, will we just reoccupy and rebuild all those or something else? Because now then this columnist is saying they're now liabilities to the host countries, and they may not even want us to come back. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that's very much the case. I would also like to finish up on the last point by saying, or asking everybody in the audience, how many times did we destroy the Viet Cong insurgency in South Vietnam before we finally left the country? Time's up, at least 6 or 7 times. How many times did we say that we had destroyed the insurgency in Iraq that was against our presence before we finally left? Oh, at least 3 or 4 times that I can count, listening to the spokesman for the forces in Baghdad. My point is that, this kind of thing goes on, and when you try to point to the cost, the real cost is swept under the rug, Dan. It doesn't reach anybody. The cost is blood and treasure. And that's the last thing anybody at the top of the power paradigm in Washington, frankly, thinks about. We can always print more money, and we can always find more people to go over and fight for us. Now, as far as this basing issue is concerned, this is a Korean journalist, and I don't know a great deal about him, but he's very articulate. What he's written is an extraordinarily well-organized, well-argued essay that simply says the following, something that we've talked about before and we know to be true. You're dealing with new potential military power, new technologies that are only just now maturing. The idea of forward basing ground forces and air forces or naval forces is now dangerous, not just to our forces that are in easy striking distance for ISR strike capabilities that the potential opponent has, but also we now put at risk the countries where we're based. There is a huge split, and has been for some time, between us and most of the allies that we have in Asia over the issue of a war with China. No one in Korea, no one that I'm aware of in Japan, no one in Vietnam is really interested in a war with China. Quite the contrary. They all want to avoid it. They all have important trade relationships with China. They've been admitted to the Chinese market. They are benefiting from that. They do not share our view of China as this imperial Japanese-like entity that is bent on conquering Asia. We're the ones that talk about war in Asia over and over and over again. I would also include the Philippines in that category, but the Philippines are so desperate for aid and support from us, they're probably going to sign up for almost anything that we offer. The point I'm trying to make is that he is right. This Korean journalist is correct. We don't need to be in these countries anymore, and our presence there is probably potentially dangerous to the people that live there, and that includes Korea and Japan in Asia without question, and probably also the Philippines. And again, not because of imminent invasion, but when war breaks out, you begin to look at the map and you identify all the potential damage that your enemy can do to you, the worst things that he can do to you. That's what guides your thinking, or it should. And so you begin to say, well, if those are the worst things he can do, what can I do to defeat him? And inevitably, you drag everyone into war. And if you listen to President Trump, and by the way, he's not the first one. I saw this go on under George W. Bush and later on with Obama. We're always trying to drag other people into our conflicts and crises as a way to try and legitimate what we're doing. Well, you can't say this war is not justified. Look at our allies here. And how does that work? Well, usually you buy them. You call the Bangladeshi army and say, what do you really need this week? And the Bangladeshi army says, well, we really need new boots. You got them. We'll pay for them. What else do you want? Oh, well, what do you want? Well, we want you to go with us to the Balkans. We want you to go with us to the Middle East. We want, this is how it goes. We start buying up supporters. Now, that's going to get tougher and tougher in this world today for the reasons we just discussed. The nature of warfare has changed. You can strike a target on the Korean Peninsula from 1,000 miles away, deep inside China, and you can kill everybody in and around that target, or you can kill nobody. It's whatever you want to do. That's changed the whole nature of warfare. It has made our presence in Korea and Japan a danger potentially to the Chinese. Now, we don't like that. Congress is going to fight this. There are all sorts of reasons. Most of it has to do with money. A lot of it is also vanity. An awful lot of what we do, Dan, is mortgaged to vanity. We're the greatest. We have this. We're there. We're everywhere. And we're talking about our aircraft carriers are out there, and they're also 500 miles away so they don't get struck by something. Let's wake up and smell the coffee. Warfare has changed. And I think the longer this conflict lasts, the better the Iranians will get. Because what we've seen since the first 12-day operation is a steady improvement in Iranian capabilities. They're much better now than they were, and they continue to get better every day. And no doubt some of that has to do with the assistance that they're receiving from China and Russia. But it would be a serious mistake to underestimate the capabilities of the Iranians. They have some very impressive engineers, targeting experts, people that have studied us and understand what we will and will not do than we think. And they've turned out to be surprisingly effective. So in some ways, I think militarily at this point, we should quit while we're ahead. Even though I don't think we're ahead strategically, I would rather not reveal anything else to them that we absolutely must at this stage.
You know, we don't have sponsors because we hate to hit you over the head with ads. I don't like them. So show a little love back. Subscribe, like, and send this to somebody you care about.